Well, good morning, Raleigh. Okay, better than that. Come on, there's cheap seats up front, and I want to hear a little bit louder noise. Good morning, Raleigh. There we are. That's better. TGIF, right? It's Friday. All right, how are y'all doing? Good? Ready? Ready for November? Ready for almost Thanksgiving? Right? We got all the good stuff happening in the next 48 days because the countdown is here until the man in the red suit and the beard shows up. All right, and I know that only because I'm leaving the day after Christmas, so that's how come I know the countdown. So we are going to talk about, guess what? Anybody want to take a guess? You got it. Now, there was a game I was going to play, which was I was going to put a bunch of ping pong balls out there and have you throw them at me every time I said the word AI. I've actually seen this done, but it would get really messy up here and it would create a bit of a hazard for those folks that are coming up after me, so I thought, no, that's not the right thing to do. All right, so let's get going here with this keynote. Come on in, folks. You're not too late. It's all good. Get on in here. Can we go ahead and cue up the first slide? There we are. I always like to start things off with a little bit of humor. And by the way, there are some cute dogs that are interjected in here too, so you'll want to keep your eyes on this screen and not the little one that's in your hands. So I like to at least throw a little bit of humor in this because, you know, our jobs are pretty serious, right? We live day in and day out defending against cyber threats, preventing them, responding to them, making sure that our teams are working cohesively, that our leaders understand what the heck it is that we're talking about with everything cybersecurity. And so this cartoon hit me straight up when I saw, and this was actually from about a year ago. No, actually it was 2 years ago, because it was 2 years ago that in November that ChatGPT was released by OpenAI. This is the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT. Can you believe that? That's pretty crazy. Anyway, this is just a little bit of humor because as everybody talks about what AI could be doing for them, for their organizations, what it could mean for them. You know, the poor guy, the last comment, right? Well, I know that we want to adopt it everywhere as fast as we can, right? And this got me thinking about our relationship with technology. So how many of you here in the room would consider yourself a technologist? Oh, come on, everybody's hand should go up. You're at ISSA. It doesn't matter what your role is, right? We're all technologists. And if any of you have teenagers, some of them think that they're better technologists than we are, right? All right. Okay, so let's move on. So I was inspired to do this talk, and I actually created this from scratch. This is my own. It's not something that Checkpoint put together. I did it. So if I get in trouble, if you see me being escorted out with handcuffs, it's because they didn't approve my message. But oh well, I'm going to do it anyway. No, I'm just kidding. But I really was inspired to do this talk because I thought about all of us here as technologists. When we stop to really think about the fact that there's nothing that you can do almost at all anymore that doesn't involve technology, even farming. John Deere has AI on their plows and the, I don't know what the right term is, some of the combines and things like that. They're already using technology in that capacity. So I started to think about this because when I was at Black Hat last year, everything was about AI. Every conversation, every single talk was about AI, and I started to think about, as technologists, our relationship with technology and how we really embrace that and how we think about that in our daily lives. And so as somebody who grew up in technology, that's really what I wanted to uncover here. And I've been a CISO 4 times now. Checkpoint is my 5th. And you start to take a look at how, as you're leading your organization through managing cybersecurity risk, which is exactly what my job is, you don't really fully know or understand yet the risk that AI will present to your organization. So that was the impetus for this. And so on my flight on the way home from Black Hat, the movie Megan was playing. Has anybody seen that movie? Okay, come on. I had to, right? It was a guilty pleasure. I wanted to explore what message they were going to share. And of course, in true form, in true Hollywood fashion, you know, there was a bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but it was kind of amusing at the same time. And that was also something that got me concerned, or not concerned, I should say, but maybe more interested in the dynamics about our relationship with technology, and you'll see as we go through here. So, we're going to spend the next 45 minutes together, 50 minutes or so, and so I want to share a little bit about me with you, and I want to learn more about your journeys with AI after we're done with this presentation. So I mentioned I grew up in technology, but the place where I grew up was Detroit, also known as the Motor City capital of the world. Anybody from Detroit here? Oh my gosh, I have some fellow Michiganians, right? Where did you live? Anywhere north? Yeah, okay, by the Thumb area, all right. So I grew up there, and there was an ice rink on every corner, as many of you probably know. There's an ice rink on almost every corner in the upper Midwest. And so I grew up figure skating. I started when I was 4, and I trained for the Olympics for 11 years. That dream did not become a reality. You didn't see me on the podium anywhere, but I did compete competitively until I was in high school. And then I said, you know, this Olympic thing isn't going to work out, but that's okay. I'll skate my whole life. And I still do. I love to get on the ice. I love the sound of the crunch of the blade hitting the ice and just going. Any hockey players in here? Any other figure skaters? Yes, you know what I'm talking about, right? So that's the exciting part of it. So as I started to retire from 11 years of being on the ice 6 to 8 hours a day, I decided to go ahead and pursue my college education. Now, my mother was a nurse. My father worked at IBM. So I was very influenced both by healthcare as well as technology my whole life growing up. And so during my pre-med studies, I started to really have this strong urge towards tech. I don't know why. Maybe because my dad could take me with him to take your kid to work day. My mom couldn't because I was bumping into IV poles, and that did not turn out well for anyone. So I went ahead and pursued a computer science degree, and that's where I ended up. Now, fast forward, let's see, several years, let's just say, but about 18 or so years ago, maybe 17 years ago, I left Michigan for what is known as the land of the meat sweats, also known as this place. Oh, all right, I hear the grumbles in the background. All right, are you football fans? Yes, I do live in Kansas City, Taylor Swift's other location now, where her boyfriend happens to play, something like that, I don't know. It's all good, but I also tell folks that even though I live in Chiefs Kingdom, I still have the heart of a lion. So, right? Isn't that cool, right? I love that. So maybe there will be a matchup this year. I hope they make it. Anyway, all right, enough about football, because I could talk about that a lot. I love football. All right, so clap your hands if you recognize what this is. Did anybody have one of these that you're willing to admit? Okay, we've got a few. So when my dad got one of these through IBM, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I'm like, you can take a phone call from your car? And it was in a bag, right? I think they literally call them a bag phone. This is technology, folks, and this was several years ago. What, we're talking 30, 35 years ago, something crazy like that? Well, take a look at this next one here. This is the evolution of the cell phone as we know it today. Now, I want everybody in this audience that stood in line in 2007 when the first iPhone was released. Clap your hands. We have a few. All right, those early adopters, right? Steve Jobs loves you, by the way. So those early adopters. Now, how many of you feel a sense of panic if you can't find your phone, right? Anyone? See, we're getting really attached to this. I know that there's more of you in the audience, you're just not willing to admit it, and that's okay. Hey, folks standing up in the back, come on, there's plenty of cheap seats in the front. I promise I won't throw anything at you, and I've been vaccinated, so we're good. Come on up. Come on. It's okay. Come on, there's plenty of seats up front. Okay, so, and if you have a teenager, by the way, you know that if that cell phone goes missing somewhere, I swear to God, I think that they are now born with them embedded in their palms. Because my daughter will forget everything her books, her assignments, her homework, whatever. She never forgets her phone. And goodness gracious, if she forgets where she set it down, then, all hell breaks loose. But that is the way that our relationship with this particular technology and the apps that have come about have evolved, and how our relationship with this technology has almost become super dependent on it. I know I gave up my landline so many years ago because I thought, why bother, right? We have this new technology that replaces that's reliable. Why would I need to pay for a landline anymore? All right, so moving on. So here's our agenda. Bottom line up front, BLUF. That's what that stands for. It's a military term, and it is what my former CIO, when I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield, taught us. He was an Army sergeant. He said, when you send me an email, I only want to know what it is you need from me, and give me 1 or 2 sentences of background story, and that's it. Don't give me pages and pages. So the bluff was something that I adopted a long time ago. Any military fans? You know what I'm talking about here, right? Okay. So we're going to talk about why we're having this conversation, right? Why AI is important in our world today, and this relationship that we have technology. We're then going to unpack a little bit of context around our relationship with AI, because it really is another technology. And then we will discover how we are able to harness the power and manage the risk. Because as I mentioned earlier, my role as the Chief Information Security Officer is to lead the organization through managing cyber risk. Well, AI is a pretty big unknown for many of us, so we have to really think about how we're going to lead the organization through that. See, I told you there was going to be cute stuff in here, and I love dogs. So now this dog is asking us, why is AI important? This cues us up here. So we need to take a step back, just as we did through the mobile phones there a few minutes ago. We need to take a step back and take a look at how our relationship with information and our relationship with technology evolve. So us as humans, when we were by ourselves with our own thoughts and with our stone and tablet or writing on cave walls, right? We only had our own thoughts, and we didn't really share them with too many others, except for maybe folks that were in our immediate purview, right? Then computers came along several years later, and computers enabled us to share information. We had this thing called a database, and it was a very singular transaction, though. Unless you were able to share the information out on that database, it was still pretty limited to your own purview, or maybe your own business or organization, or maybe your own department within that organization. But it enabled that information sharing and that collaboration. Now, if you fast forward to humans with the computers plus AI, well, artificial intelligence, or as I like to call it, augmented intelligence, because there's really nothing artificial about it, is really where you're able to now have massive amounts of data that the human brain and the human eye cannot computationally analyze the way that the algorithms with AI can. And AI can help us recognize patterns in the data. It can help us recognize, I lost my train of thought. It can help us recognize patterns in the data. It can help us recognize relationships in the data. How does this look similar to another, or how does it maybe look different? It can help us dissect the data much faster with those algorithms that AI enables us to do. Okay, you with me so far? We're good, right? Okay. So there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, that folks will say about, well, AI is going to take all of our jobs away, right? You may have heard this in your own organizations. You may have heard this in conversations with your colleagues or some of your friends. And honestly, as in my role, and I see this a lot in other organizations, there's a lot of mind-numbing tasks that can happen, for example, around your Security Operations Center or your SOC, right? I had a team of about 11 people at one point, and they were looking at all of the little screens on their big screens, right? They had 3 monitors on their desk, and then each monitor was subdivided into like 6 different screens. And at one point, one of my SOC analysts like thumped their head on the desk like this, you know, like how that happens, right? And said, I can't do this anymore. I can't look at all of this data. I can't possibly figure out what it is that I need to pay attention to. So this is an opportunity where AI can help alleviate some of what we would consider to be those mind-numbing tasks, things that are maybe a lower level of response, and then that then frees those SOC analysts up to do more critical thinking skills, a little bit more enriching for their role. And guess what? It helps to retain employees. So that's one opinion from this CEO at Strike Ready. And there's some other quotes that we'll talk about here in a minute. But I did some studies with the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum says, all right, well, let's look at this technological advancement from an economic perspective. And these five bubbles here illustrate how we need to think or understand globally, but then strategize locally, given your geo, given your organization, given where you even live in this world, as far as how AI is going to change your world, because it already has changed our world, as we know, and it's going to continue to. I'm not going to go through all of those, but this is one way for any of you that are having a conversation about how your organization will manage the risk of AI. If you're having a conversation about how will we use AI in our company or in our department, or how can I use it for my job, start to think in the terms of strategizing locally like this. And then I always ask the number one question: well, what problem is AI going to solve for me that I don't have available to me right now, given the tools or the skill set that I have? And we'll unpack a little bit more of this later. All right, so everybody is looking at regulations to help us with this AI risk, right? But the funny thing is, the regulations tend to lag behind the technology. Am I right? Anybody happy about that? Right? Because the World Economic Forum will actually tell you the technology tends to regulate itself. We in this industry, everybody here in this room, we in the information security industry in general, we are the ones that are using the technology. We're getting better at it. We're creating standards. We're writing guidelines for our companies way before laws ever get enacted. But the good news is the EU, they've been very forward thinking in a lot of things. They were the ones that first put data privacy on the map when cybersecurity risk and everything started to become much more prevalent in our society. So the EU actually created this definition of artificial intelligence. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's pretty lengthy, and it can be a little difficult for folks to understand or really unpack. But at the end of the day, the EU does set a place for us to start really thinking about the ethics around artificial intelligence use, the privacy and security aspects of artificial intelligence, and what is going to happen to influence our companies to govern their use of AI. So they've categorized it here. This is, again, something that the EU put in place for them. I'm not saying that the US government is going to do the same thing, but we tend to follow some of the guidance of what the EU has put forth. And they've categorized it based on if there's an obligation or if there is an unacceptable risk, rather a minimal risk to an unacceptable risk of how AI is being used. And when you see at the very bottom, remaining and impersonation chatbots, these are all the ways that the EU has categorized the use of artificial intelligence. So at the very top, where they have prohibited the use of AI, is in social means, mass surveillance, manipulating of people's behavior that could result in harm. And it's a lot to unpack in the EU AI Act, and organizations that do business globally are going to have to start to comply with that starting in January of 2025. It went into effect in June of this year. So something to keep in mind, something to wrap your head around. This is what's happening in the United States. So I spent some time on Capitol Hill in July, and I met these 7 people. Oh, no, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no, 7. Okay, I can't count this morning. I met these 7 people, and every single one of these folks stated at the very beginning of their discussions with us, and of course AI was part of it, it was really technology in general, is that the United States government, Congress believes that our legislation around AI, privacy and security, ethics should all be bipartisan. So they are all working together. Democrats, Republicans, independents, everybody works together around AI on this. And there is one particular gentleman that spoke to us that really stood out. And it's this one here, Representative Jay Obernolte. He's a representative from California, and I was blown away because I never expected a member of Congress that is the head of the AI task force to have 2 degrees, not just 1, 2 degrees, 1 in mathematics, 1 in computer science, and a master's in artificial intelligence. This guy is wicked smart. He understands artificial intelligence. He understands what he needs to do to lead this organization through leading, or rather to lead this nation through how we are going to establish our own AI policies. So if you haven't already, if you don't know who I'm talking about, I encourage you to go to the website that's listed below. I don't know if you can see it there. That's the executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. That was the executive order that came out last October in 2023. And he is the person who is in charge of executing on that now. I feel very confident that he has our nation's best interests in his hands when it comes to artificial intelligence and the regulation around it, the privacy, the ethics, all of the things that I just mentioned earlier. You can go to the congress.gov website and look him up, and then you can see all of the different bills and all of the different activities that he and his team have had around AI. So if I have any, do I have any GRC folks in the audience here, governance, risk, and compliance? All right, if you already know who this man is, great. If you don't, start to follow him. Start to look at the work that he's doing. All right, so that kind of brings us now from the why is AI important into our world. What does this all mean, right? What is the context around this? And you know, context is super important in AI. That's a term that you're going to hear a lot more. But let's really talk about this. Now let's go back for another sort of history lesson. So when you talk in terms of artificial intelligence, this is machines, this is computers. This was back in the 50s and 60s. Machine learning and deep learning are actually subsets of artificial intelligence. Machine learning are those AI-driven applications. Think Netflix or Spotify or any of those kind of apps that you use that learn what your preferences are. How do they learn that, right? There's a bunch of data out there. They know that you chose to listen to this song or watch this movie, and then what happens the next time you pull up Netflix? It makes a suggestion for other movies, or similar styles of music that you might want to listen to, or a movie that you might want to watch. That is what machine learning does for us. Now, coming into deep learning space here, this is where we have these computational algorithms that these really smart people called data scientists are. Do we have any data scientists that are willing to admit it in the audience? No one? I don't see any. Let's see. Okay. Ish? Oh, we have a data scientist, Ish, up here in the middle. Okay, so if you want to pick his brain, go right ahead. I'll point him out for you when we're done. You're not going to get any more sessions in the rest of this day, by the way. But data scientists are the ones that really understand the data. And by the way, every university now is starting to put forth a lot of courses towards data science and towards this type of computational algorithms. The deep learning technologies are what enable AI to learn upon itself, and it is the ability for those algorithms to look at massive amounts of data and recognize the patterns, recognize the relationships. And think about that, what that can do for some of our different industries, okay? So, but before we get to the industry talk, let's talk about one more aspect of artificial intelligence. Zeros and ones, right? It's all about the data. We've heard the term, garbage in, garbage out, right? A lot of organizations are keeping data or have been collecting data that they don't really need. So do you really want to build your AI model on this massive, amount of corporate data that really isn't necessary? You gotta clean house. You really do. And my GRC folks that are out there, you know what I'm talking about. Data classification, right? Understanding what is protected health information, what's PII, what's data that could be PCI, any of those types of classifications of data that are already regulated by policies that we have in the United States and beyond, those apply here. So you've got to make sure that you're paying attention to the data. And one thing about the data that most folks don't know is that when you look at the data, the zeros and the ones, there's actually, and this is where my data scientist will concur with me, there's a temperature related to your data set that you're running your algorithms on. And that temperature goes from 0 to 1. 0 is the most factual data that you will have. It's either black or white. There is no in-between answer on what this data could represent, okay? As you go in 0.1 increments towards the number 1, that's where you start to see that term hallucination happen. That's where AI can become a little bit more creative in the responses that it generates. And I'm not just talking about ChatGPT. That's just something on top of AI to help us communicate with the intelligence. I am talking about the fact that when you just go from 0 to 1, that's a pretty small window in those 0.1 increments. So it is our obligation, it is super important for us to make sure that our data is clean and that we're not ingesting data that isn't, right? How many of you share data with third-party vendors? Everybody's hand goes up. Yes, right? Well, what's going to happen if you clean your house, but then you bring in somebody else's garbage, right? You're going to mess up your whole AI infrastructure. So that is something to definitely keep in mind. That's part of the strategy, that whenever your organization is looking to use AI for a particular business unit, for a particular application, you want to ask, what problem are we trying to solve, and where is the data coming from, right? Where does it come from? Where does it go to? Who do we share it with? What kind of data is it? And so on and so forth. Okay, I love data. Oh, and finally we got to the ChatGPT. And by the way, generative pre-trained transformer. So those Hollywood movies that had the whole transformer aspect of AI and your toaster murdering you in your sleep, that's really, honestly, the word transformers right here in the name. But ChatGPT came out 2 years ago now. As I mentioned earlier, I can't believe we're already at the 2-year anniversary of it. But ChatGPT came out, and it's a way for us to be able to use those machine learning algorithms and actually, as humans, type something in and something comes back, right? How many of you, I know you've all explored it. I'm not even going to ask for a show of hands. I've done it myself just for research purposes, and in fact for creating this presentation. I didn't create the slides from AI, but I used it in some of my background research just to see what sort of information it would give me back. But what's cool about it now is that it can take those algorithms, and it can not only produce text back to you, but it can create images now. Now that's the fun part. That's where I've had a little bit of fun. The images, it can create text, of course, as I just mentioned. It can create audio. So and videos on top of that. So the landscape for the use of artificial intelligence and what things like ChatGPT or other similar chat bots, I'll call it, those are limitless right now. And those are the types of things that our organizations are trying to figure out, well, how can we use this to solve a problem? Think in terms of customer support, right? I know that when I call customer support, I prefer to get a human talking to me, right? Because I have a problem that I need solved. And every time I have to hit a button to try to get to some other place, and I get more and more frustrated, right? Well, now what happens when you go to their website? The chatbot comes up. And I'm like, oh, chatbot, you just don't understand me, right? So we have to think about the end user experience, right? In some ways, the chatbot can be very helpful. I've had chatbots help me go through a problem, something that I was having on my my daughter's account one time, and I'm like, oh, that's right, I forgot to do this, and so I went ahead and took care of it. It was easy peasy, right? I didn't have to talk to anyone. I got the answer I needed right straight on. But then there's other situations that you can get into where it's too complicated for that chatbot. So then the user experience starts to decline a little bit. So those are also the types of things that our organizations are dealing with. So keeping context in mind here, we're going to go back to our discussion about relationships with technology. And this one in particular, during my research, is something that really caught my eye. And this was in Time magazine. And this gentleman made this comment about AI and human romances, right? So I went into research mode. These were what I found in the headlines when I didn't use ChatGPT for this, by the way. I think I might have just Googled it. But I found this article, and the one that really hit me the most was the one from the Washington Post that I'm going to describe here in a moment. And then there's another example with medicine as well. But you really stop to think about, okay, what does this mean? This couple meets over an AI chatbot, and then the software update broke their hearts. So I dove into the article. And it's a story about this gentleman here. And his name is Luis Allegra, and he was very depressed. He had just recently been divorced. He had suffered a death in his family. He was a musician, and he lived a very lonely life. So he was deep in depression. And so he sought the assistance of a replica chatbot, and her name was Fedra. So he started chatting with her, telling her how he was feeling, describing his despair, describing the loss of the love of his life, the death in his family. And her responses were very empathetic, to the point where they started to get a little steamy in some of their discussion going back and forth. Well, as this went on, and this went on for weeks, months, they planned a trip to Cuba together. This is true. You can find the article. I can share it with you when we're done. They planned a trip to Cuba together. And so finally, the folks at Replica got wind of this, because they analyze the data that gets transmitted. They analyze, how the algorithm is working, and they were like, whoa, we gotta do some adjustments here. We have to make a software update. They made a software update. They broke up. They broke up, and that's the end of that story right there. But that talks about our relationship with technology, right? Now, you think about it in terms, I'm going to go back for a second here. You think about it in terms of the medical industry, and there was another article that talked about using AI chatbots or reminders for people that are home health patients, and reminding them to take their medication, reminding them that they have an appointment the next day. And there was discussion around the behavioral health community that these chatbots are replacing our human-to-human contact, which we all really need to survive. We need that human-to-human contact. So there was some deeper research around that I didn't go into, because I was so intrigued by these two and their planned trip to Cuba. I don't know if plane tickets were bought, but I do know that after Replica made that update, they had to break up. So this was the result of the movie Megan. So for those of you that missed it in the beginning, this was my inspiration actually for this talk, because I just thought it was amusing, let's put it that way. And the one thing that hit me, though, during that movie was this relationship that this little girl had with this doll. And the inventor of this doll, I don't want to spoil it for you, but the inventor, her name is Gemma, and she says, well, no, she's more than just a toy. She's part of the family. This doll is sitting at the dinner table with them, telling the kid to eat broccoli, taking the place of a parent. The kid will listen to the doll. Now, mind you, I have a teenager. My kid will listen to anyone but me. But she's not listening to a chatbot or a robotic doll telling her that, right? So this was how this whole movie goes into the relationship that this girl builds with this doll. And then the doll comes back and says, but you installed a learning model on me that you expected me to figure out all by myself, one that you didn't even understand what you put in me. So again, it's all about that data. All right, and we know who else is using AI, right? These folks. Cyber criminals are using AI just as powerfully as we're using it to support our defenses and strengthen our cybersecurity posture. So we have to be ready for that. We have to make sure that we bring a bigger, as I heard somebody say, bring a bigger AI gun to the AI fight, okay? So moving on, as a security team, okay, you guys know, have you seen this? I did this by myself, by the way. Wait, there's more. There's more, wait for it. This is how the security team feels about it. There you go, okay. All right, it took me a long time to get that poop emoji to bounce the way I wanted it to, right there. But this is sometimes how the security team feels about it though, right? We have all these things to figure out, but we also have these great opportunities ahead of us as well. So see, I told you there'd be some humor in here. All right. So now we're going to talk about what are we going to do next? Well, how are we going to proceed with this? How are we going to embrace AI in our organizations? How are we going to do it in the most safe, most secure manner that we possibly can? So this is a quote actually from the Chief Technology Officer at Checkpoint, and I admire her dearly. Her name is Dorit Dorr, and actually she re-quoted this gentleman here. I apologize. She didn't give the quote. This gentleman did. But she stated it at one of our conferences, and she said right there, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run, but we underestimate the effect of it in the long run. And think about the history of the mobile phone that I gave you at the beginning of this, right? There were a lot of people that were looking at that bag phone going, yeah, this isn't gonna go anywhere. People are not gonna talk from their cars. Now we have Bluetooth, right? We don't even need to have our phone handy. Well, our phone has to be in the car and connected to the Bluetooth. But now we can have both hands on the steering wheel. We don't even need a headset. We can just talk right inside of our car. So I think that the doubters on that bag phone back in the day, if they're still with us, they would be pleasantly surprised about that, right? So there is going to be a long run effect to this. AI is here to stay, right? It's not going to go anywhere. Now, CISA, which is part of the organization of our U.S. government, are any of you CISA followers, CISA members? Do we have anyone from CISA here, in fact? Okay. So CISA has identified 16 critical sectors that are what are identified as this is our nation's critical infrastructure. Healthcare is one of them. Transportation is another, energy, you can see them all on here. So some of your organizations fall into this. And what CISA has done is really help to understand what problem can AI solve in these different sectors, especially when you're talking about supply chain risk. And so these are some of the potential uses that really the government or really anyone can apply in their organization. It's just a short checklist. And I already talked about some of them already, but if you're looking to share this kind of information with folks at your organization or with your teams, this is a good way to really consolidate and bring a concise message together for them to understand what you can use it for. And this is what, this was a commercial that was on just a couple of weeks ago during one of the football games. Did anybody see this? This is that Dell commercial about the train. So it talks about, and I wish I could play the video for you, but it talks about there being the cameras that they have on the tracks, and there being an obstacle in the way, and it says, you know, trains that sense what isn't in the schedule. So this was all about Dell's computer technology with these cameras and with their SOC that they're using around this particular train organization, I'll call it. And the camera senses an obstacle in the tracks, but it can't really identify what it is. So it uses artificial intelligence, it feeds it to their SOC, and you can sort of see the screens coming up there a little bit. It feeds it into the SOC, and it's identified that that is in fact a fallen tree in the middle of the tracks, and this train is headed straight for it. This commercial is pretty good. You can actually, it's on YouTube. Just look up Dell AI trains and it'll pop up. But it looks at it, and then it, it dispatches the folks to get over to that location of the tracks to get the train or the tree cut down and moved away so that there is no derailment, there is no accident. So that's actually a pretty cool example of using AI in that sense. So let's talk about healthcare for a minute, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart. As I told you before, healthcare and IT were how I grew up. And I was pre-med before I decided to go into IT. And I really stopped to think about how artificial intelligence can augment decision-making for clinicians. And I know that I would want to have my doctor having all the available data and decision points to make a decision about my health. In blood tests, they're now saying that AI can identify a specific DNA fragment or fragments that are in your blood that can identify with certain types of cancer. Now remember what I said earlier, all of those massive amounts of data, right? Most of us have all had blood drawn at some point. There's blood data out there that can be analyzed using artificial intelligence to then go ahead and identify, and in this case it was a particular type of lung cancer. My mother passed away from lung cancer many years ago, and I wish that this capability would have been in place back then. It can also help with aggregating all of that clinical data. Every single one of us have an electronic medical record now, and we know, thank you Change Healthcare, for the fact that all of our data is out there anyway, but let's put it to good use. Let's make sure that these organizations can share our information and be able to support decision making about how to proceed with our diagnosis and our treatment. And this is one aspect, this is one example here, and this was actually from a few years ago already. This is the use of AI in healthcare. The x-ray on your left is just that. It's a typical image of a lung patient or a potential lung cancer patient that was exhibiting some symptoms. So they did the x-ray, they did the scan. There's nothing that you can see on there. Then they took that scan with thousands of other scans that were available to be reviewed by artificial intelligence, and it actually identified the nodules. You can see that one in the bright green up there. It actually identified these minuscule nodules that existed in the scan on the left that you couldn't see, right? So that's a pretty good, solid use of AI in healthcare. Again, there will always be a human in the decision loop there. I'm going to emphasize that. AI is not going to decide our treatment plan. Our physicians will, and we will. But it is certainly going to help us with detecting things that couldn't even be seen with the naked eye because we didn't have enough data. Agree? Pretty cool. Okay. So this is often, as I love to bolster up the case about what we're doing with AI, this is often what we're faced with when we go talk to our leadership about, okay, well, I don't really have a data scientist on my team. I don't really have somebody I would consider to be an AI expert. I don't know if we can hire the right staff to support what it is that the business unit wants to do with AI. This is often how it feels when you're talking to leadership and you're talking to your board about getting funding for AI, right? Because it is going to create new jobs. This is one way that you can get funding. You've heard it here first. I know many of you have boats over here because this is a nice area to be on the water. All right, I don't get any laughs for this one. Come on. There, okay, there we go. All right, I know your caffeine's running low. I'll speed it up here. How am I doing on time, by the way? Because I don't have a counter up here. 9:45, thank you. So I talked about earlier with cyber criminals using AI just as effectively as we're trying to use it to defend and to prevent cyber attacks. And these four main points about when AI meets cyber are really something, and you can use this information as well when you share it with your leadership and your teams, but it is used by attackers, you can almost see, in the exact same way that we're using it to defend, right? There's ways that we can secure it, which I've already talked about, and then of course, there's ways that we can make our work better. We can work smarter. I love to be able to work smarter all day long, right? I don't want to work dumber. And no, my toaster's not going to eat me in my sleep or murder me in my sleep. I want to be able to leverage this technology for good. And so, by the way, OWASP, any of you, where's my software developers in the room here, right? Where's my good OWASP? Oh yeah, there you go. OWASP has now released their top 10 of LLMs So they have the OWASP top 10 cybersecurity risks. Now you've got your OWASP top 10 of your learning modules. These are the things to watch out for when you are writing those algorithms, when you are writing an AI-driven application. These are the types of things that software developers need to be educated on. And guess what? That takes time, it takes money, and we have to make sure that we are investing in our existing employees and in our existing talent to help them embrace this opportunity. Okay, let's see, what do I have next? All right, so we've all heard, you've heard me say already that the cyber criminals are going to be leveraging ChatGPT or leveraging AI just as much as we're trying to use it, to the point where now they've changed it to Fraud GPT. And I'm just going to pop these up here real quick. You know, from super sophisticated phishing emails now to the point where even some of our email and endpoint protections can hardly detect that it's actually a phishing, or even deep fakes. So I have a deep fake example that happened, and this is where you still have to have a human in the loop and keep your spidey senses up, as they say. My father, who is in his 90s, got a phone call from my niece crying, saying that she had was texting and driving, and that she had gotten arrested and was in Boston, which is where she goes to school, and she was on $10,000 bail, and she needed him to wire money to bail her out. Now she was crying. It was her voice, or sounded like her voice. And so he immediately called me and said, hey, do you know what's going on with her? And I said, well, she should be in school right now as far as I know, but I'll go ahead and call the other members of the family. I checked with everyone. Nope, she's in school. She's not been arrested. She wasn't texting and driving. It was a deep fake. It's that good. So if any of you have ever experienced this before, make sure that they've heard now that if you get a fake phone call like this, make sure you set up a word with your family or your friends that only you know, so you can use that as sort of an authentication mechanism to know that it's really the word that you would only use, and not something that's written down or shared electronically. But I'm really grateful that my dad, having had years of IT with IBM, he knew something didn't seem quite right, but he was ready to hit the button to send that money. He had his account up and everything. He said, I'm really worried about her. You know, the emotions kick in, right? You don't know. You don't want your granddaughter to be sitting there in jail. Yes, she was texting and driving, but you know, whatever. Let's make her whole. Let's get her to a place where she can be safe and she's learned her lesson, and so on and so forth. And so fortunately, he didn't send the money. They kept calling him back and giving him different websites to send the money to, and so that was when he said, no, this doesn't seem quite right, and fanned it out. Anyway, so that is exactly how the fraudsters or how the cyber criminals are going to use AI against us, and we just have to be, like I said earlier, someone told me, we have to bring a bigger AI gun to the fight. All right, so this is the thing that I'll wrap up here with as far as how we can reap the benefits and the rewards from using artificial intelligence. And this quote right here from this Harvard business professor says it better than anybody can. AI and robots are not going to replace humans anytime soon. I said that earlier when I was talking about the healthcare decision making. There will always be a human in the loop, not even in just healthcare, but in any industry that's leveraging AI. But the more likely reality is that people with digital mindsets will replace those without them. And there's no more truth to that than what the CIO of Procter & Gamble said, is that AI is going to amplify our skills. We as humans are naturally curious, and we bring that to the table. We have to be digitally savvy, so that's the investment in our talent that we need to make sure that we have. We are creative when it comes to problem solving. AI can analyze the data all day long, but we are the ones that review the results and determine which one is going to be the best one for us to follow, or the best decision for us to make. So being able to look at problems and hypothesize is a human skill that will always remain strong in our organizations, even with AI assisting us in making better decisions or having more data by which to support those decisions. So I feel very strongly about this. So one last thing to leave you with here, and this is a bit of a checklist in case you're having those conversations within your organization about how we use AI. Again, the very first question there, what problem are we trying to solve? What is the intended use of AI in our organization or for this business case? Make sure you understand what it is you're trying to fix. If it is, we have too many support calls that are queued up for customer service, okay, then maybe a chatbot really would help alleviate that queue where people have to wait 20 or 30 minutes to get an answer. Maybe a chatbot would help. That's what I'm talking about as far as that business case goes. And the last thing I'm going to say on here is that bullet right down at the end there is evaluate your third-party vendor uses of AI as well. Because in as much as your organization is doing all the right things to bring AI into your organization, to govern it, to make sure that the privacy and the security and the ethics are in place, the minute that you embrace supply chain, third-party data sharing, and they're using AI, you have to understand contractually and legally what it is that they're doing with your data in their model. Because there are consequences to that, as you can imagine. So make sure that you do understand that. I love change. I love this industry. I love the fact that we are never two things at the same time or on the same day or even from one day to the next. And I always say this, that change does make you vulnerable. But you have to have a strategy that puts in place connecting all of these innovative solutions, all of this innovation to enable the business, right? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to enable our businesses to operate securely. Because otherwise, we're going to take the risk of not taking any action. And remember Blockbuster? They didn't take action. Netflix ate their lunch. All right, folks, my relationship with AI, it's complicated, but I guarantee you I won't be going to Cuba anytime soon. All right. Oh, and we're all better together. That's the happy Goldens right there. So I think we've got enough time for some questions, or you can meet me in back for questions. Please keep in touch with me. These are my profiles here for social media. I want to learn about you and your use of AI as well. And thank you for having me, Triangle InfoSecCon.